So theology of the body might be a term that you've heard before, maybe not, of the church, but I like it. It's like what Jana Lynn said. I think it's our story of freedom and how God wants us to be free. And I also think that it's a love story. And I think that's the part that really, at least for me, kind of captures my imagination. And I don't remember hearing the term theology of the body. That's a fairly new word for this. And I first heard about this when I was a freshman in college. And like I said, it just really, captured my imagination how, God is a God who's a part of every part of our lives, right? So our bodies are a living testament to God's goodness and God's creation, which kind of flies in the face of a lot of things that people believe about religion. Theology of the body, the bottom line is that the body is good and that the body deserves respect, and that's something that you can see all through the Bible, all of the things that are said, especially in Jesus' teaching, that the body is a temple. But like any love story, this isn't a Disney love story, so there are hard parts, just like in your own love story, and there are parts where, you hate certain parts of it, and you love other parts, but in the end you stick with it because it's completely worth it. So I can really appreciate all of that from this point of view. So I've always liked this quote from Fulton J. Sheen, because I think that this kind of encompasses, especially theology of the bodies. There are not 100 people in the United States who hate the Catholic Church, but there are millions who hate what they wrongly perceive the Catholic Church to be. And I think that that's true. And I think that that's true especially for theology of the body, because a lot of us believe that we know what the church teaches about, like this list of no's about what you can't do with your body. And while there might be some truth to that, there are also some misperceptions that have alienated a lot of people. And I think with a little more research and delving a little bit deeper, maybe people could see why. So again, I think it's a matter of a misperception that alienates people early on, and then they aren't willing to delve deeper, maybe even not through any fault of their own, especially for anyone who carries any scars of any sort in their lives, physically or emotionally. I think that sometimes it can be hard to hear some of these things. So theology of the body covers everything that the church teaches about sex, about marriage, about babies, about the place of children in the church, about our bodies in general. So I had to do this because I'm a teacher and I just can't have you do nothing this whole time. Did you get a KWL chart in front of you? It's a know, want to know, learned. So what I want you to do now, and you don't have to write anything down if you just want to talk about it too with the people who are sitting next to you. What do you already know, or what do you think that you already know about what the church teaches about sex, marriage, babies? If it's wrong, even if you think it might be wrong, but you've heard it and you think it might be right, that's fine too. I want to know what that is. And on the other side of that too, if you have any questions that you think of during the presentation, if you have any questions now, write them down. I don't even care if you think they might be an offensive question or kind of a personal question in a way. At least put them down. I'll try to, if I don't answer it during the presentation, I will do my best. I don't have any sort of credentials to be up here, so if I have to pass off, it's a great way to start. If I have to pass off that question to someone else, I will not hesitate to do that. So if you want to take the time right now for the what I already know or what I think I know. What does the church teach about sex? What does the church teach about our bodies? What do they teach about the place of children? If it's nothing that you don't know, but we can say like, okay, children are good, right? That's something that we know.
Sometimes.
Truth.
No.
I know, and that covers so much. That covers like all of humanity. That's hard to bring it down to pinpoints.
Mm-hmm.
Right, things like that. And everyone's like, I do not want to talk about this. Is there anything that, I don't want to draw this out too long for you. Is there anything that you know or that you think that you know about what Do I have to stay with this?
No,
kid?
no, you were fine. You can walk forward.
Okay.
It's a lot different nowadays, and when I was growing up,
Okay.
my mom, like I told Aubrey, I think last weekend and again today, my mom thought if you kissed a guy, you could get pregnant because they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
They didn't have these things like Viagra and sanitary napkins and all advertised on TV or the radio or anything like that.
My grandma didn't even know what it was until she was engaged. My grandpa had to tell her what that was.
Yeah.
Because you didn't talk about it.
And my dad was along the line that you didn't talk about it. And so, in a way, when I was in 7th grade and they started teaching it in the public schools, I was about the only kid in my class that could take the papers home and talk to their mom about it. My dad had passed away by that time. And so I was very comfortable at that time talking to my mom about it. I don't know why I become so, I don't even like discussing it with my OBGYN, but I mean, they're the doctors of it. So, I mean, I get embarrassed by it and that, but I mean, it's come along.
Yes.
Kind of a long way, I guess.
And yet that's still a difficult thing. Like, I have to say I'm, like, not enjoying, like, saying the word sex 30 times to you today. Like, it's not my favorite thing to stand up and say.
Thank you for doing
this. But once again, we come from that background, like, it's something that's secret, right, that we can't talk about. And it does have its place.
It does. And it's not bad.
Right.
Because if it's used where it should be, it's not supposed to be bad because God created it.
Absolutely. You just took like my next 3 slides, okay? Yeah, you did.
Yeah, and that's it. But like again, thank you very much for teaching us because this is such a hard subject.
Don't say thank you yet.
And when I was going through it, like I said, with my daughter, they had so many problems. They had endometriosis, and at that time, nobody knew what it was. I had it, and I kept saying, I'm having this pain, I'm is there anything that can help me? And the doctors are all like, oh, well, you gotta, don't drink this, don't eat this,
Right.
And then when I took my daughters, because my oldest one was having such hard, terrible cramping and, they put her on the pill. And then we went through this class and I got told, oh, that was the most terriblest thing that you could do.
We'll cover that.
We'll talk
about that. And so that's one percent. The taking the pill absolutely is 100% wrong. We will talk about that. A lot of people think that. Okay, we'll talk about the use of that. Okay, and the reason for it. Is there anything else that you've heard that the church teaches, or that the church teaches about that sort of thing? Anything else?
Well, I was Baptist, of course, but we were taught there's certain things you do not do, and if you did them, I mean, they broke your neck. I mean,
stone you to death.
Literally, I mean, they took you out.
And that's my picture from the first slide of the woman who committed adultery.
Yeah.
Jesus is down beside her in the dirt, drawn in the dirt beside her. Yeah.
In those days, it was all right for the man to do it.
Right.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, and
Was it though?
It was okay.
No, it was not according to church
he got a boy, and the woman was stoned.
Right. Where was the man? Yeah. We're actually going to cover a little bit about why everything kind of seems to like turn that way a lot of times, especially in the past. Anything else that you've heard that you believe is a church teaching, something that you were taught, something that you've heard, something that you're bracing yourself for and stuff? And you don't have to.
I guess what I've heard was the use of birth control.
Yes.
And to me, I would like to, hopefully that's something you're going to touch base on.
Absolutely.
To me, that was like a hard one to think and swallow myself because I'm like, if I'm having a hard enough time financially supporting the children I do have, I'm going to protect myself in my family
Absolutely.
and support the ones I do.
And
So I'm curious about that.
as a woman, I can 100% understand where you're coming from, and I hope that today will kind of maybe clear up some of the things that you've heard
Yeah,
and the
'cause it's not
whys for
necessarily
things.
that because
Yeah, and I feel like I want to apologize to you before we start about any of the misperceptions that you've had that people have told you. If people have made you feel like you cannot be a part of the body of Christ without doing certain things. While the church does teach certain things, they are out of love. So if you have been presented those things in any way besides in a manner of love, I apologize personally to you right now because that was wrong. Even if that person was right about what they said, that was wrong. I have my own experiences with that happening, which we'll talk about as we go on. Like as we were getting married, going through some of the marriage prep, I felt very, very vulnerable and very talked down to by some of the people that were giving us this information. So from a certain extent, I can understand that to a certain point, and so I want you to know that I'm no way, coming at you guns blazing today. Also, understand, and I don't know, we've talked about this before, that I'm required to tell you certain things that the church teaches, but I hope that you can see it, that it's all from a place of love, that I'm not in any way trying to come on too strong or insult you or insult your family members in any way, right? We are all a part of the body of Christ. I remember once I had a really bad run-in at church when I was a Eucharistic minister, and I remember telling my friend about it. I was like 22 at the time, and I had gotten like yelled at behind church for like washing the parts, like the chalice, incorrectly, and I hadn't even done it, but I took the blame because I was the youngest there, and I was just first off angry and really upset. And my friend said, that woman who said that to you may have been trying to protect the body of Christ, but in the process she wounded the body of Christ.
Yeah.
So I want you to know that I thought of that the whole time during this presentation today, right? That the last thing I want to do is wound the body of Christ. We're talking about the body right now, and that's all of us. You've already been baptized, you're already a part of that. So yeah, Gina Lynn?
Also, I think it's important to remember that most of us in this class are coming from a different theological background. So we live what we know. And I don't believe that God condemns us for that. When you get more light, you walk in the light, Father Mark also says what you say. I'm going to tell you what the church teaches. It's up to you and the Holy Spirit to figure out how that can play out in your life.
Yep.
So we may be talking about things that are very foreign to our culture and to our sense of independence, and I did it my way now, but it bears considering. It bears considering and praying about it and saying, God, show me.
Absolutely.
Show me.
Absolutely. Well said. So just a quick rundown on where the theology of the body kind of comes from. Pope John Paul II, now Saint Pope John Paul II, was the one who kind of compiled the church's idea on sex and marriage and the beauty of the body in his Wednesday general audiences. I think that's when he just kind of gives a quick impromptu teaching on those Wednesday audiences between 1979 and 1984. So these teachings have been around since before I was born, and I didn't hear about it till I was in high school or college. There were 129 talks, but they've kind of been condensed into kind of a theology, a document, and it makes up about 2/3 of what you'll hear today, actually, and about anything that you find on theology of the body. And actually, one of the sources that I'm taking from today is Christopher West. Has anybody ever heard of him? Okay, good. He is actually a man who lived kind of, I guess you could say, like a promiscuous life in college, and he woke up one morning after a one-night stand and realized that he just felt empty. Like there was just nothing. He just felt like there was this void that he needed to fill, and so he went on a search for it and found this theology of the body, and he has turned it into an extremely accessible book. If anybody wants to borrow this, feel free. Oh, sorry. The Good News About Sex and Marriage. And if you're anything like my husband, Chris, who it was required reading from me before we got engaged, you will hide it behind another book so that your mom doesn't see you reading a book that says sex really big on the front. So, but feel free. I mean, if you want to borrow, it's in question and answer form, so you can kind of find the question that you're looking for, what exactly it is. And this is a really applicable book for whatever state of life you are in, because they cover a lot of things, whether you're married or not, or thinking about getting married, or never want to get married, or have another plan. Very accessible.
I think he came to the university, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I worked with a lot of groups.
He does a lot of speaking
And
engagements.
one of them was the Newman group, which I never remember,
Mm-hmm.
I never thought was Catholic until they changed it or something. And anyway, and I think he came to talk because they actually presented him, and he was one of the groups that was one of the groups that I worked with.
And I believe that he's kind of the reason why the theology of the body has hit mainstream Catholicism, because he's made it so much more accessible, right? He has kind of worded it in a way that we can understand. One thing that he says that I think is interesting is you have to think that it must be God's inspired word coming out of John Paul II, because how did an old celibate guy know so much about the human experience, sexual experience? Because there are actually a lot of practical points to it. And I think you'll find, if you start to dive in, that it's especially protective of women. I know that Mike mentioned this a few weeks ago, that the church has kind of this reputation for being antagonistic to women, and I would argue that the church is extremely protective of women. And we'll get into that again as we go a little bit further. You'll see a little bit more of that. Also, we'll be, taking some things from the Bible, and also the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a lot to say about the holiness of the human body. And I think that all of this has to do with remember what Mike said a few weeks ago too, which I thought fit perfectly with this. The church something isn't true because the church teaches it. The church teaches it because it's true. So theology of the body is not something that the church, made up and is giving out to people. It's actually something that's already true, and so the church is trying to kind of help us live our best life, right? And that goes for anything, but especially the things we're going to talk about today are really applicable. The first thing we have to get straight is that the human body is a beautiful thing. There are a lot of world religions that teach that you have spirit and you have flesh, and the spirit is the good part and the flesh is evil, and so there's this eternal struggle between good and evil, and your body is the bad part of that. The church doesn't teach that, and Christianity in general doesn't teach that at all, right? We know that in the second reading. If you've already gone to church this week, in the second reading it talks about the resurrection of the body, meaning that all of our bodies at the end of time will resurrect and reunite with our souls in a glorified state. You can find that several places in the Bible. We say it in our creed, right? I believe in the resurrection of the body. And why would God have created a body? God can't create or doesn't create evil. And so why would that have been his crown of creation if that was the case? This is one of the earliest paintings of Romeo and Juliet, pretty much. The Christian Romeo and Juliet, Adam and Eve, in the catacombs. And so I thought that was interesting, that they're kind of an essential part to what we're going to talk about today. Can you tell I've been teaching Shakespeare to my students this week? It's been very, very confusing for me.
The Apostle Paul says that the human body is weak, not sinful, it's weak.
Exactly.
The flesh is weak.
Exactly. And that is, I love how, I'm not going to even have to, introduce most of my slides because people are already doing that for me. No, that's perfect. That's good. And it makes me feel like, okay, I think I did it right. And I also think, I love that the Catholic Church is very carnal when it comes to worship. We use our bodies for everything, right? Catholic calisthenics, as Chris calls it. We're always kneeling and standing and sitting, and we bow at certain parts because we know that where your body goes, your brain goes, right? So if you're bowing at a certain part, your brain snaps too, right? We get those little bells at consecration because, snap back to the front. We're using our ears for that. We use the sign of the cross. We genuflect when we come in. We receive Christ physically into our bodies. He goes into our bloodstream. And we call ourselves the body of Christ. And all of those things are for us. I don't think God doesn't need me to genuflect. But I think that I need to genuflect, right? God doesn't need me to bless myself with holy water every time I come in. That's for me. So our bodies are an instrument that God uses to show us more about ourselves. Okay, so getting back to, that's my nephew, by the way. All the babies that you see on here are actual babies I know, because I'm not going to go on Google Image and search babies I don't know when I know lots of babies. So all the babies are real babies. So let's kind of go back to natural law when we're talking about what we believe. We believe, if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, a good argument to give is, how do you know right from wrong? And Mike talked about that, right? Natural law. There's a spark in every person who has the mental capacity and is at the age of reason where you know right from wrong, right? You can ask any 5-year-old and they'll tell you it's wrong to lie. It's wrong to take something that isn't yours. It's wrong to murder another person. These are things that are no-brainers, right? So we believe, as Christians, we take natural law a step further and say that the world tells us about God, right? So some would say that God is invisible, but in a way you could argue that he's actually visible in everything. So if we start at the smallest point, you could think about cells for a second. I mean, who could have ever imagined that we're made up of to our tiniest parts, so completely ordered that every cell is almost like a little world of itself. And then I think about storms. We have a lot of technology and we have a lot of ways to make our lives more convenient, but man, does the world grind to a halt when there is bad weather, right? So storms, that shows how mighty God is. Flowers, how beautiful, how elegant God is. Trees, how powerful God is. So I think that's easy from the Christian perspective, if you already have that perspective, to see that God is in all of those things. So if we can believe that, and that's not crazy to us, that we can see God in all of these pieces of nature, then really the conclusion that the human body is a part of God's instruction and part of God's gift isn't a huge leap, right? If we look at the creation story, we know that the human body was God's crowning moment of creation. It was the climax, it was the pinnacle. And so it stands to reason then that there is a message that is not even, I wouldn't even say a hidden message, it's a very obvious message that God is giving us using our bodies. It was again, I keep stealing from Mike, he talked about arriving at your conclusions with intellect. If we can go through that process of realizing, okay, it's not hard for me to believe all of these things, it's funny how sometimes we kind of fall short of that final conclusion that we are God's masterpiece. We really are, and he meant it that way, and I think that the creation story makes that very obvious in several ways. So when God put Adam and Eve, now I took a class on the Pentateuch in college, and my teacher was a Hebrew scholar, and it was eye-opening. The story of creation, when God creates Adam, the Hebrew word for Adam is earth creature. And so before Eve is created in the original Hebrew, Adam has no gender in Hebrew. He's just an earth creature. Because without a woman, what is a man? That doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't have to mean anything. But as soon as Eve comes on the picture, the language about Adam changes. See the things we lose when we translate things to another language? Of course we have to, but we lose that original meaning that it goes from earth creature to man and woman. And notice also that Adam immediately recognizes Eve as flesh of his flesh. God isn't I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Eve. You might notice some things are different about her than you. That's not what happens, right? Adam already knows because it's obvious, right? It's obvious. And he responds in joy, and God gives them the charge to be fruitful and multiply. So I think that it's obvious from that fact. And the Bible's also very clear to tell us that they were naked at that time, right? In the garden. That's a very clear part of that story. And I think that that's an important part that we gloss over, right? That Adam and Eve had complete and total unity with God and with each other. They were following his charge to them to be fruitful and multiply. They were having sex in the Garden of Eden. I know that that's not something that we necessarily say, pearl clutch. Yeah, but it's because it's a good thing, and we have taken this thing that is so beautiful and kind of, made, it's not something we can talk about. And I will argue that it depends on your audience, right? We're not telling this to little children, but of course it's a beautiful thing, right? And God made it to be that way. God made it for Adam and Eve to enjoy. Okay, they were one flesh. It didn't take genius status for them to figure that out. Okay, so then the fall comes along, and of course Satan is trying to convince them that they need to know more, right? They need to, God is hiding something from them, right? And so I would also argue with that, and you can get really philosophical with the reasons for the fall and what actually happened, but the actual sin of Adam and Eve was in believing that God was withholding something from them, and they had to do something about it outside of God's will. Doesn't that sound like all of us? Why do we sin? Because we don't believe that God has the best in mind for us, and we know better. I know better, right? Here's the other interesting thing about the Hebrew. I don't know if, I'm sure, I love to read classic literature, and there's always there's always this idea that Eve is, she's this temptress, right? Because the serpent came to her and, and told her to eat the fruit, and then she went to Adam, and so she's the reason for Adam's downfall. In the original Hebrew, the serpent is using a you-all form when he talks to Eve, right? And so he isn't just talking to Eve. Adam is right there beside Eve. So what does Adam fail to do? As Eve fails to repulse the serpent, Adam fails to protect his woman. And isn't it funny how throughout all of history, you could argue that dynasties are built and fall for this very reason, right? That original sin runs its vein through all of history, right? Men will have the temptation to dominate and to not protect women, and women will have the temptation to manipulate men. And does that not sound like our society in a lot of ways and the issues that we have? I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about as a whole, right, of civilization. We can see that vein throughout time, that is one of the weaknesses of the fall, is our tendency to use each other. And so then the Bible is very clear to tell us suddenly Adam and Eve look at each other and they're ashamed and they put on clothes. They're afraid. Why are they afraid? Well, they've looked at each other and they've realized that they can use each other. So instead of Adam giving of himself completely to Eve, he realizes he could just use Eve, and vice versa. And so what do? They suddenly have secrets from each other, and they put on clothes, and then, the rest of that story where they get kicked out of the garden. It doesn't mean that they stopped loving each other. That isn't what it tells us at all in the Bible. But they realize some things, right? That they have some power to use each other. So I think it's important to go back to the beginning and see kind of where all of this started. That's a lot to take in, but I think that it kind of makes sense throughout the rest of humanity, the rest of human history, how we've been struggling that same struggle after the fall. But the good news is that, like Isaac said, we are weak, but we still have choices. Right? We can still choose. So God still stamped his image on us as male and female, and we still have a duty to that difference, that complementary difference between us. And so why did God make us different? Why not just one person? Why not just asexual reproduction? That seems to work fine for mushrooms. There are a lot of mushrooms. Why not for people, right? Because we have to think that we are God's most intricate work of art. He must be trying to tell us something, right? What do you do when you have a little child and you're trying to teach them something? You give them pictures, you give them diagrams. We are God's work of art, right? We are the best thing that he has to show us who he is. So we know that God is a life-giving communion of persons, right? This is Trinity theology, right? That the Father and the Son completely pour out of themselves to each other, and that's an eternal exchange of love. And that love is so amazing that it actually is another uncreated person of that Trinity, the Holy Spirit. Notice I say uncreated. The love between the Father and the Son does not create the Holy Spirit. He's another part of the Trinity, obviously. And so that is what our bodies are trying to tell us, right? That total outpouring of love, it kind of sounds familiar, right? Creates or can create another person. We are the image of the Trinity. We are not the Trinity, but we are an image of the Trinity, right? You have to dumb it down for humans so that we can see it, right? Think about even talking about the Trinity. Do you fully understand that? I don't. That's why we call it a mystery, right? But I can kind of start to understand that when I look at it in a practical life application like that. Another thing that I just have to put in there just in case, as a college student, I was a little bit freaked out by that analogy. God is not sexual, right? We are simply an artwork and a piece of God that shows that connection, right? Because I remember hearing this and being like, what are you trying to say here? And being a little bit freaked out. God himself is spirit. He is not sexual. We are an interpretation of that relationship. Good so far? Questions?
Can I offer another viewpoint on that?
Yeah.
God is not sexual, that is correct. He is a creator. And he gave us the gift to create because we're not like him. So he says, I made you in my image, and I am the creator of creators. I created everything for you. But here, have a piece of that.
Which, how awesome is that? Like, you get to help with creation. I mean, you make a very good point, it's kind of amazing. And again, a point that it's not for God's good, because he could just continue to create people out of the earth like he did Adam, and every so often there'd be a person, you know, coming up out of it. But he didn't do that. Like Isaac said, he wanted us to have a piece of that creation, to like get to do that. Another analogy that God is trying to teach us with human sexual relations is that Christ is the bridegroom and the church is his bride. And there's a lot of imagery throughout the New Testament about this, especially in Revelation, about the bride of the Lamb. Anytime you see the bride of the Lamb, we're talking about the church. And so the important part there is Christ is the bridegroom, so he pours out his love freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully into his living church. And the bride, the church, receives that sacrifice of the bridegroom and continually renews, regenerates life. Right? Sound familiar? Again, it's that same imagery. And I always think of that statement, "This is my body given up for you." Christopher West has, I think in his intro, he talks about his father-in-law. He never got to meet, but there was a story about his father-in-law, his wife's dad, the morning after their wedding, so they had their wedding night, and then they went to Mass the next morning. It was a Sunday, and he cried through the entire consecration and the last part of Mass. And afterwards, his wife was like, "What is going on? Like, you're sobbing this whole time." And he said, "I've never understood the words, 'This is my body given up for you,' until last night." Okay, choked up. Okay, so this is marriage promise is a covenant that will endure until the end of time. And if you look at the Bible, what is the Bible? It's a love story between God, the bridegroom, right, and his church, right? He's continually calling back this church who does terrible things, and she messes up, and she gets, you know, we've got like Babylon and all of these things that people messed up, and what does God keep doing? He just keeps pulling us back in, right? And so every marriage is a little microcosm. Now I'm going to lose it completely. Every marriage is a little microcosm of this like amazing love story that we're a part of, right? Because our brains can't handle that much, and God knew that, right? That we need a smaller view of all of that. So the important words for my last slide were that we are called to love the way that God loves, right? That's the whole point, that we're made in his image. So there are 4 tenets of theology of the body. And when we go through the second half of this with practical application, these are the 4 things that we are going to judge an action by. Love has to be free. There cannot be coercion or expectation of gain. And those of you who are married remembered the day of your wedding, they ask you, are you here of your own free will? That is important. It has to be free. And with no expectation of gain, right? I can't do that because I'm expecting something out of it. Totally, without reservation. You cannot hold any part of yourself back during the marital act. That is not a part of that. And then faithfully, a total investment in each other and no one else. You forsake all others for that person. And then fruitfully, life-giving and open to the possibility of life. Again, we'll come back to that. That's the one that freaks a lot of people out, and that has a lot of misperceptions connected with it. But always open to the possibility. So in Theology of the Body, we believe that every person is born with an indelible dignity. There is nothing that you can do that will ruin that dignity. It does not matter who you are. You can be a beggar on the streets of Calcutta. You can be a prostitute. There's nothing you can do to your body that takes away that dignity that you have. So the use of another person or ourselves, you can do it to yourself too, in rejection of that dignity is wrong, because you are God's piece of art. You are not your own to ruin. So any use of another person or of yourself, the church teaches, is wrong. So far kind of makes sense, but that comes with a lot of responsibility. Let me see where I'm going from here. So now we're getting into, that was the basic, that's like the theology part, right? And now we're getting into what does that mean for you today, or for us today? I think that the church's teaching on human sexuality is a challenge. I really do. It's something that I really believe in, so that's why it breaks my heart. Sometimes when people have a misperception that someone has pushed on them, because that's just so wrong. It's so wrong to make another person feel less than. Like Jana Lynn said, you don't know what you don't know. So if any of this is new to you up here, there is no use in you feeling at all like everything has been wrong up until this point. No. Again, we have to tell you what those basic tenets are, and you decide how that's going to be lived out in your life. I put up some quotes up here that have always helped me in my moments of not really despair, but maybe on the edge of that when it comes to the church's teaching, because they're not easy. But what is easy that's ever been worth it? marriage is certainly not easy. And so it would stand, if it was that easy, then there must be a catch, right? If it really was that easy. So I love that the church is a hospital for sinners, not a club for saints. I've sat in church some weekends and thought, I should not be here. All of these people here, they know what they're doing and they know where they're going. I should not be here. That is not from God. God is not saying that to you. That is not God's voice, okay? Also, saint is a sinner who keeps trying. Read that one a lot with the Catholic theology of the body. And then the glory of God is man fully alive. What does that mean to be fully alive? Well, hopefully we'll get into that in this second part, and you can kind of see what does that mean. So now I'm going to give you could say that it's kind of a list of don'ts, but in a way, if you look at it, it's a list of things that are not good for you. And so they are don'ts because that's not going to be your best self and your most free self. And I thought you were here to support me.
There's the whole marriage.
Marriage is really hard.
I just want to point out, you can remember this by the, it spells out lamp.
Oh.
In case you want this list for your further reference later. So anything that we do with our bodies that is not free, total, faithful, and fruitful, like God's love for us, is contrary to his plan for our bodies and souls. So you're not going to be running at premium if these are our habits, right? And again, if any of these up here in any way apply, this is not a condemnation. This is just one thirsty person telling another thirsty person where the water is. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So it's a list of to do, right? When God says no, he means I love you. So if you look at this list, you can see how it doesn't fit under free, total, faithful, or fruitful. All 4 requirements have to be met to love like God. We can't kind of love like God, right? We got to put our whole selves in. And that's why you're here, which I really admire, that you're already here doing that. You're putting your whole self in. So lust, that's not really free because we're objectifying another person who can't participate at all in that, who doesn't really have a choice. It's definitely not total, and it's not faithful. Adultery obviously doesn't fit into the faithful category because at least one of the people in the relationship has an obligation to someone else already, so it can't be faithful. And I'm kind of like glossing through. If you were to really get deeply into these, you could see that in a way it doesn't fit any of the 4 requirements. Masturbation isn't total and it isn't fruitful. Pornography, definitely not free. We're objectifying someone who again, a lot of times, I mean, that industry, if you look at what some of those actresses especially go through, that's not something that you want to support because it doesn't fall under any of those 4. And then rape, incest, prostitution, and polygamy. But again, some of these things are addictions. I feel that that's important to point out, that your culpability is different if it's an addiction, and I would hope that you would get help, especially like pornography right now. That's a really common one, and people are so ashamed. And the thing about this is that the human body is the best thing that God created. And so what is the thing that Satan is going to go after? The best thing that God created. And so all of these things have a little piece of the truth in them, right? That's why we're attracted to them. We can see a little spark of what could have been God, but it's not, it's twisted, right? And so that's why some of these are very attractive, and there's no shame in finding help for them, or if you know someone who does have an addiction, because that's the reason why they're attractive, because we are smart enough, we can see that little piece, that little spark that should have been God, and it gets confusing for people. Where is God in these things?
Betsy, the other thing that I noticed
Yes.
is that with all of those, it's not just, the common thinking in society is, well, that's between me
Yeah.
or me and one other person, but if it's just me that I'm hurting,
Right.
it's not though, because that tears down the fabric of society, it tears down the family, it affects the family, and it continues to grow and grow and grow.
Right.
It's like having a little bit of the flu.
Goes back to that whole, if one part of the body is hurting, then the whole body is hurt. That's true. And then what did a priest tell me once? There's no such thing as a secret sin. Somebody might not know what you are doing, but you're right, it tears down us as a whole, as a body. Also, I just think about with this part of it, this is the part where people start to kind of feel uncomfortable, some of the things that we're getting into, and I think of a story I heard a while ago. There was this woman who was talking about the love of God and how we don't trust that the way that we trust parental love. We don't think about it in the same lens. And so she was like, I have a 3-year-old son, and when we cross the street, I make him hold my hand, and he hates it, right? He doesn't know why he has to hold my hand. He tries to get away from me every time, but I do not let go of his hand because I know the danger of the street, and he doesn't. But can you imagine if my son were to get away from me and run out in the street and get hit? I would not be saying, I told you so, and I wouldn't be standing over him in judgment. He's a 3-year-old boy. I was trying to protect him. I would make sure, I would be devastated. I would be getting all the help that I could for him. And I think that's such an easy story to understand. And anyone who's a parent, or in my case an aunt in here, can totally understand that. So why do we doubt that God, who is all goodness, there's no duplicity in God, there's no two-facedness in God? Why do we doubt that he doesn't have those same feelings? If we mess up with something, there's in no way a feeling, well, I told you so. I told you that if you did that, it was going to turn out this way. That's not how God operates, right? And it's just always amazing, myself included, that we doubt in God what is so obvious in parents. And that, I think, again, that's kind of that message of the enemy, again, that God, you've done something that God can never forgive you for. Absolutely not. If that's the voice that you're hearing, that is not God's voice. So the next few slides are kind of getting their own slide, and it is not because they're extra bad, it's that they're just kind of the things in society right now that are becoming a little more prevalent, and so I think they just bear a little more explanation. So premarital or extramarital sex and cohabitation. So God created sex to show us the union of the Trinity, right? And the image of Christ and his bride, the church, and how that generates new life. And so that's not a light charge.
He's leaving.
I don't trust him. He's like, I'm out of here. So the church teaches that sex can only make sense within the marriage vows, because if not, the church calls it disordered, which literally just means it's out of order, right? That the marital act is a reenactment of your wedding vows. So every time that you do that, you are restating your wedding vows. In fact, the church doesn't even consider a marriage valid if the couple does not have sex after their wedding vows until the marriage is consummated. The church said that it's not a completed marriage yet for that very reason. And so sex outside of that, the church would say that your bodies are almost kind of speaking a lie. They're speaking a vow that they haven't really committed to yet for that reason. Again, I am giving you this information just so that you know where the church comes from in this. This is for your own good, right? Kind of your own protection. So the cohabitation part too is difficult for a lot of people. I will say, Chris and I have been married for 1.5 years, and we got a lot of heckling for not living together before we got married. And for practical reasons, it seems to make sense. Bills, traveling back and forth between our homes, it seemed to make sense. Cohabitation is one of those things. So there are 2 reasons why the church would kind of frown upon that as well. The one is called the occasion of sin. So, like I remember somebody said, well, you can sleep in different bedrooms. That's true, but the temptation of sleeping in different bedrooms, it doesn't take too much to walk a few steps to another bedroom. And the church teaches that putting yourself in the occasion of sin, a situation where you know you can more easily sin, is also a sin, right, to do that. So you need to remove kind of that temptation for yourself. And then on the flip side of that, people say, well, don't worry about what anyone else thinks. I'm not sure, that's kind of like pop psychology to not worry about what anyone thinks, because I sure do worry about what my younger siblings think is happening and what my nieces and nephews think is happening. I have a duty to protect them. And if there is another person who's maybe struggling with, should we live together, should we not, I don't know what to do, if my opinion matters to them, and then they see that I've done that, the church calls it creating scandal, which sounds like really scary, kind of, but I think of it as protecting the young minds around me that are watching, because they are definitely watching. They definitely notice the difference. So that would be why the church would say, it's kind of a protection for yourself to wait until you have the stability of those marriage vows. And I had other friends that said, well, that you can still walk away in a marriage. That's true. Mm-hmm. But for those of you who got married, it's a lot of trouble to get married and then just walk away, after the wedding night. That would be somebody who's like really committed to that already. That's of course people walk away from marriages, but that's a very different thing than what we're talking about. I had a priest
as a person who's been divorced for 25, 30 years, you don't walk away.
No.
It's there. You limp away, and you limp away with a lot of baggage.
The only people
So-
that ever said that were people who
Who had
had not
gotten
experienced
divorced.
that. Exactly. Or married.
Yeah.
Or married. Yeah, we got a lot of unasked for advice, which I'm sure you can all understand. I think too that this teaching of the church is really empowering to women and children, besides its first appearance, because it's giving a stability, a way for women to not be used within sexual relationships and then discarded as objects of pleasure, and it also gives children stability, any children who are born out of those unions. So it's kind of a benefit to have both parents, living in that home. Of course, we're talking about ideal here. That's not always how that works out. But again, this is optimum. What the church will say will give you the most freedom to be, express yourself. So that would be the part on. That's the church's kind of stance on premarital sex, extramarital sex. Also, I had a priest say once, there's no such thing as pretty much married. Like when we were engaged, people were like, well, you're pretty much married. He's like, that's like being kind of pregnant. You either are or you aren't. Yeah, there's no we pretty much are. That being said, I do have a lot of friends who did live together, and they have very holy marriages since then. I'm not saying well, if that's what you did, there's just no way. I have friends who have marriages to model a life on. They really do. But most of them that I've talked to have said, if we had it to do over again, we might reconsider had we known. I think that's another charge of the church that we need to get better at, is being braver, myself included, being braver about these conversations. Look, I care about you, and this is what I want for you. But that's a hard conversation to have, and especially unsolicited, right? With it, when someone is not asking for advice, it's hard to go there.
I wish my ex would have, because this is, he always wanted me to wear certain things, and I was like, but if I do that, and I'm out in the living room, your two boys who are mine and my daughters are gonna see that, and how am I gonna tell my kids not to do that if they see me doing it? I felt as if I had to set an example in that, and I wish, because
But you don't know
still
what you don't
see
know.
where I was heading the right path, and I'm not saying that I stayed on it because I didn't, but I mean, I can now see
Articulate it, kind of, yeah. And I think that goes back again to that little spark of God that we have in us, even though we're weakened now. We know certain things, and our hearts feel those certain things. I remember doing things and then having a stomach ache for a week, and then realizing what it was, because my body knew something before I knew it. And when we get to, I think some of these other slides, you see that where your body knows some things that maybe your brain, it takes it a little bit longer to get there in your heart. So we do have to cover with this part homosexuality and transgenderism, because those are things that in our current world are being brought up, and this for me is one of the most difficult topics. I have dear friends that are married to married, not married obviously in the church, in the eyes of the church, but married to someone of the same gender, and this is a very hard conversation to have. So again, it kind of goes back to, if you think about what we've talked about so far in theology, we know that sex only makes sense, that the marital act only makes sense between a man and a woman, right? God obviously made our bodies where we don't even need an instruction manual. It's clear by the way that we're made. We're created male and female and complementary. And also remember that for love to be like God's, it has to be fruitful. It has to have the possibility of creating new life. And so again, the church would say that homosexual acts are disordered because they take place outside of marriage. Just like they would say the same for heterosexual acts outside of marriage, that they're disordered, meaning not in the proper order that God meant for them. There is if this is in any way applies to any of your family members or dear friends like it does for me, I would suggest researching this further, because there's a lot of misinformation going around about how the church feels about this. I feel very strongly that science is still supplying the answers for us about what it means to be homosexual or transgender, and so we first off should not pretend that we have the answers for someone else, that we understand their sexual experiences or what it is like to be them. And I also feel very strongly that shutting out a person who has confided in you for this reason is not the right way to go about it. Times have changed, and so I think that that's less common than it used to be. Couple of things that are important though. Same-sex attraction is not a sin. The church does not teach that. I hear all kinds of things all the time about that. It's acting on that the church would say is disordered. That is not really something that those people, I would say, I mean, and maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but that's not a matter of control, right? Just like heterosexual attraction, you can't really help that. It is what it is, right? We would say the same thing. So that is not a sin. And also, I always think with things like this, we are not merely the sum of our sexuality, right? We are so many things beyond that. And so to reduce someone to one that, they can't come to Thanksgiving anymore because of that is reducing them to one facet of their personality. I would suggest reading, there's a statement from the Bishops' Committee on Marriage and Family. It's a U.S. document, and it's called Always Our Children. And it is very clear from the beginning of that document that the last thing that it's written for parents whose children have come out to them. And it's very clear that the last thing that should be done is cutting out children who have come to their parents and said, Mom and Dad, I think that I'm gay. The church does ask, and this is the part that I always struggle with my own friends. My policy, and I don't know if it's the right policy, so don't take a page out of my book, is I do not give my opinion to those friends unless they straight up sit me down and ask me, and that's happened like once. So my job is to love those people. That's the only thing God told me to do, right, is to love them where they are. If they ask, if they really want to know, I won't lie, but I will give them the most loving version that I can. And the church does ask people with homosexual tendencies to live in chastity. Actually asks all of us to live in chastity. In marriage, you're supposed to live in chastity. That means living the correct form for the life that you've chosen. So in a chaste marriage, the husband and wife are only together, right? A single person is abstaining from all sexual acts until marriage. And so the church asks the same thing from people with same-sex attraction. I find that really hard as a married person to tell someone else that fact that, that that's what the church teaches. So again, I tend to go with, I respect, your decisions. If you ask me, I will tell you. I don't know if that's the right way to do that. I don't know, Janelyn, if you have any insight on that either. I kind of chicken out.
I don't think it is chickening out because people don't generally receive the real message unless they're looking for the real message.
That's true. That's a good point.
If they are just looking for a debate, they're not really looking to learn anything or to change anything. So
and that I don't engage in. If I have a friend that wants to debate it, no.
There are plenty of arenas for debate.
Yes.
But in personal relationships, Christ calls us to love, not to debate.
And that's what I was going to add as well, that if I have that conversation with a friend and they come away from that conversation with anything other than the message that I love them and nothing can change that, I have failed in that conversation. So, again, I think that you all are loving people and will figure that out. That's something that I have struggled with lately. Yeah.
My sister had an abortion, and she looked at me and she said, "You're not going to love me anymore because I'm doing this." And I said, "No."
Yeah.
I said, "That's not true." I said, "I'm going to love you. It's just, I can't do it because that's not right for me. I feel differently than you do." My oldest brother was gay, and we didn't talk about it, but I still loved him.
You loved him.
And I know he knew that, but I mean, I don't know if he knew that I thought what he was doing was wrong. I'm sure he probably did.
But I think a lot of times
we didn't go back and forth. But I mean, when my sister came to me and said that, it was like, no, I'm not gonna stop.
But I think that if a person doesn't ask to, like with my friends, if they aren't asking, it's because they know what my answer will be. And so I don't feel called to give them the bullet points of this is why I think. If they're not asking, they already know. And so we can just go with the love part. I will love you no matter what you do. There's nothing you can do that will, that will ruin that. So hopefully that kind of sums up that teaching of the church. If you're hearing anything but love in this part, then I'm not doing a good job. So I'm just hoping that that's what you're hearing. Is that so much compassion? Because I can't imagine that. I don't know if I just can't even imagine how difficult that must be. And so I just have a lot of compassion. Transgenderism is another thing, just so much compassion for how difficult that must be. Right, so it is in the American Psychiatric Association, their Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I do not know how much longer it will be in there. They've taken out a few other things that were considered mental illnesses and now are not. This one is still in there. The medical community is very divided on what should happen with that. But it is a thing. It isn't just like, oh well, you think this, but that's not really true. It's a strong desire to be the opposite gender of what was what you were born as. So it's kind of a misperception. A lot of people almost compare it to anorexics who think that they're so huge and so they starve themselves, but they're actually very tiny and they need to eat. And it can be treated actually. Transgenderism is something, because it's what we call like a body dysphoria. It can be treated with cognitive behavioral therapy because it's kind of like this hatred for your own body as it is. So if we believe that our body and soul were fashioned by God, He doesn't put a female soul in a male body. And I worry very much. I'm kind of someone who's like the least medication possible for the situation that you're in. And I worry about a lot of the hormonal replacements and surgeries on young children. They're trying to do this before they hit puberty. And that makes my heart kind of sink just from a medical, knowing the little that I know medically about that sort of thing and what hormone replacement can do. I think this goes back again to that whole, these are protections that are in place. These are things that are already true that the church is kind of putting out there. They're not reinventing the wheel here. This is for the protection of a very vulnerable population of people. What were you going to say, James?
And in the light of time, so many changes are coming in such a short amount of time that I worry about the research.
Yes.
For all of time, humanity has gotten along without all of this stuff, and suddenly, I think we've almost created a situation where we think we have to leap to and take drastic measures to change something, and we haven't seen long-term studies.
Right. And I worry too that we're blurring that line. Like, you don't hear the word like tomboy anymore.
No.
Like there might be a girl who just likes to play sports. Yeah, and that doesn't mean like, so do you think that do you feel like, are you comfortable being a girl? Like I feel like in some cases we're too quickly trying to vet, like a young child isn't really worried about like boy or girl stuff at a certain point.
And it kind of goes back to that whole Adam and Eve separation, because our senses of who we are have completely changed. And instead of being whole people, male and female, each are whole in and of themselves, but then they come together to create a more perfect situation. Instead, we divorce ourselves. If men have more feminine characteristics, suddenly they're not men.
Right.
Or women. And it's so dumb.
Yeah.
It's so dumb. Instead of teaching people, no, all of you is okay. And
Yes.
if you're a little boy that likes to play with dolls and wear pink, you are absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
You
That's
do
right.
not need to toughen up. You will find out how to toughen up in God's love.
When you're ready.
However,
Not to make this too political, but this is not a world epidemic. This is a United States of America epidemic.
Yes, because
This is not a worldwide, this is not a global problem.
Well, if you live in a third world country, you're not really worried about, you're worried about housing and food, and I agree with that.
This is not even a European problem. This is an American problem.
we see Junior playing with a doll, therefore mother goes up there, oh, you really want to be a girl. You know what? And how does a 4-year-old know, I want to be a girl, I'm in the wrong body, Mommy?
And I think that in some ways, again, not to get too political, but I feel like politically I'm more right-leaning, but I would fault the Christian right in some ways of like planting that idea of like, he's, like you were saying, Janelle, like he's playing with a doll, like he must, instead of just relaxing about it, because kids don't care about it.
He wants to be a father.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's lovely.
That's what I say when my grandsons pick up, a dolly. I look at him and I say, Parker, not even two.
But what is a G.I.
But,
Joe?
he's like,
It's a doll.
A G.I. Joe is a doll too.
It's a doll.
Yeah.
3 brothers and 3 sisters, and my brothers know every word to every musical, every song.
Oh yeah, Gabriel
And-
does.
You know, that's fine. It was because they were forced to watch all of that.
Right.
My brother, when Christmas comes around, my brother texts me like all the lyrics from White Christmas, like
Yeah.
from every song. Like it was fine. You know, again, we're simplifying an issue. There is, you know, there is something going on there, but I think we're coming across that kind of from the wrong angle. And another thing I think that makes that pretty clear that is not what's working is that the suicide rate is very high for transgender individuals, and it does not change once they have a sex or hormone change. And that just like breaks my heart to even think about that.
We've also assigned roles to the different sexes culturally.
Yes.
Just gonna say that. It's a very cultural thing. Like,
Yeah.
think of the Easy Bake Oven. They don't market that to boys, but how many men grow up to be chefs?
Yes.
Right.
You know?
Right.
A lot more than women.
And I think back to that creation story, God wasn't like, now Eve, you make sure that you're doing the cooking and cleaning, and Adam, you go till the fields. You know, and she can't help ever. Like, yard work is not for ladies. Like, no, it was be together, be fruitful, multiply.
And I think that we have done a much better job of saying, you know, gender does not have to rule every aspect of your life.
Right.
But we've kind of swung to the crazy far side of that as well.
I just find it interesting, you know, I'm sure everyone in here is like, we remember playing house. You know, dressing up your siblings, even if it was
Oh, my little brother
your
wore so
brother
many
was,
dresses.
you know, wearing a
Yeah.
dress because you're playing house for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
If
Like,
you
are
have
we-
big sisters,
Are we
you're
not
gonna be
letting our
rich.
children do this and, you know, setting them up for possible failure as a unit with a husband and or a wife? Like, oh, you only cook and clean. Oh, I'm only gonna mow the lawn.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we've taken it kind of too far. I thought that this part of the Catechism of the Catholic Church was worth putting up on the screen and reading through, because this is the Catechism is kind of the official church teaching, and this is the part about those with same-sex attraction, but I would say that it also applies to transgenderism. We're talking about men and women with homosexual tendencies, must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite the sacrifice of the Lord's to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross, the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. Homosexual persons are called to chastity by the virtues of self-mastery that teach them inner freedom, at times by the support of disinterested friendship, by prayer and sacramental grace. They can and should gradually and resolutely approach Christian perfection. How heroic, right? How heroic. I just think that people that choose to take on that role, that is just like self-mastery. Like, what a heroic virtue that we're all called to, but like, what a path. Like, all the respect in the world if there is someone who takes on that charge.
I have to say that just within the last 10 years, I have met 2 couples, 2 gay women and 2 gay men, who were deeply, deeply, deeply committed Christians. They were deeply committed to one another, and they were deeply committed to leading a completely chaste relationship. And
Wow.
that slew me. That just was like, what love and what respect for one another, for their honesty in their feelings, and their uprightness before God.
I can't even imagine living that out. There's also a video on YouTube called I think it's called The Third Way, and it's about chastity in those situations. So that's another video that if this is a topic that's on your heart a lot, or you know of someone, like that helped me too, because I struggled with that for a long time about how is the best way to do we never talk about it? Like, if you and your partner want to go out to dinner with me, like, can I go? I mean, I know that sounds silly now, but that were like real questions that I had, like, what is my obligation here? But I think that's a great video to watch, even if that's not your call to be a hero in that way, to maybe support the people that are, but we're all called to be, like heroic virtue. But I just think like this, that's real heroes there. Okay. Abortion, death penalty, and euthanasia, right? So we cover like everything that has to do with the human body. So the church teaches that the human body and soul is sacred and valuable from conception until natural death, right? So from the time that the sperm and the egg come together, that is a person with their own DNA, soon to have their own heartbeat. They have all of the rights that any of us do. Abortion at any point in a pregnancy is wrong because the very fruit of a sacrament is being terminated. However, this is kind of an important however, in the case of the mother's illness, necessary treatment to save her life and that may indirectly terminate her pregnancy is not immoral. So for example, if a woman were to discover she had cancer while she was pregnant and she were to get chemotherapy and the doctor would say, most likely you'll miscarry because of this, the church would not ask her to withhold. A lot of people are confused about that. She would not have to withhold on chemotherapy. Some women do choose to wait until the baby is born, but that is not a requirement of the church. Now, if the doctors were to say, you will have to abort so that we can start treatment, that would be an issue. But the indirect loss of the baby to save the mother's life is still considered, morally acceptable, right? Because the church does believe that the mother's life is just as important as the child's. I think this is the important part too, to say, just like with all of the other things that we've talked about, that, and I'm sure that you already know this, but women who get abortions mostly feel that they don't have another choice. And this is another area where we won't really beat a dead horse talking about a topic that I'm sure that you know what the church teaches on it. But I feel very strongly that if you are pro-life, we are wrapping our arms around those women who have felt they had no other option, and also giving women who are considering that option a lot of support. And I think that's what pro-life people do. That really gets to me when people are talking only about the abortion issue. When we're talking pro-life, we should be talking about all of these things, all of the ways that we can support them. So that always really convicts me when people say things like, well, what are you doing then to help those mothers in those situations?
But there
And it's
was
a
a
good question.
time, when they used to protest, and they're upset because a mother's going there having an
Yeah.
abortion, and then they blow up the clinic.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
what
yeah.
are they doing?
Right.
They're doing exactly
I
the
don't think
same
that ever
thing.
changed anyone's mind.
No, it's like
Misguided actions is what those were.
Yeah, but that's-
They started off with good intent and then they were misguided.
It
And
goes
then
back
they-
to that
it's
whole
like-
how does Satan work? He takes something that's a good,
Yeah.
okay, abortion is wrong, but what does Satan do? He takes it to an extreme. Satan is a creature of
Right.
extremes.
And also, it disorders our relationship with God, because instead of trusting God and the Holy Spirit to convict people, we think we have to do something big and impressive
Right.
now, this minute.
Just a quick note about the death penalty. Again, unless you have questions, we'll kind of go through it quickly. The church teaches that the death penalty in all cases is immoral unless the criminal cannot be contained. So that would be, which almost never happens anymore. So that would be like a mafia member who's still orchestrating things outside, or El Chapo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if even the most high security prison isn't working, then the church would teach that the death penalty in that case would be appropriate. But they said for punishment to be effective, it must restore justice, deter future transgression, and rehabilitate, which I would argue that our prisons are not doing. So I would say we have an immoral prison system as well. I don't know, we don't really want to get into that questions.
I kind of waver on that, so yeah.
And a lot of people do, and I
On
think
the
that's a
death
hard
penalty.
one. I think that abortion is an easier one if you're a pro-life person. Be like, oh, a baby, but a criminal is a different story.
What does
It's harder to
Jesus teach?
love.
What does
Exactly.
Jesus teach?
Yep.
He loved
Jewish
the
law
unlovable.
says stone her to death, and
Yeah.
Jesus says what?
Right.
Mhm.
He loved the unlovable.
Whoever, without sin, yep.
And that's again that heroic virtue that we're called to too. That that's okay. And then in euthanasia, so again we're talking about to a natural death, right? And this is, I would argue that this slide is talking about our obligation to the most vulnerable of our society, the people that need us the most to speak for them because they're not able to speak for themselves. And I would say that especially in the case of euthanasia. The church teaches that any sort of lethal injection or withholding food and water to hasten death is immoral. However, extraordinary means are allowed. It's kind of like with the abortion thing where, if the mother needs treatment and that results in the death of the baby, that would be considered moral. Same thing here. Catholics can have a DNR, do not resuscitate, right? They are allowed to, withhold extraordinary means.
Even like hospice, I know this because people have asked me about this.
Yeah, you should talk
In
about this.
hospice, there are points where you don't feed, you don't provide hydration any longer, not withholding it, but because the body itself is shutting down.
It's not accepting that.
And the body is not accepting it and the patient is not asking for it. So you go by what the
Absolutely.
natural body is requiring.
But that's
That
still
totally
a
makes
hard
sense.
decision.
That's a very hard
I
decision.
know.
I'm so glad those hospice nurses,
Yeah, that was
amazing
my,
people.
And you don't, again, you don't have to say, that's it, no more water for you, no more food for you. The person themselves is the guide. When they no longer seek it,
You aren't forcing food on them because they have to eat.
you are witnessing a transition.
but to sign those papers,
Oh, yeah.
that is a horrible, horrible thing to do. I had a terrible time making that decision, and it was awful.
Yes.
Because I don't believe, I have never believed in abortion, I've never believed in a death penalty, any of those, and then I'm saying, here.
You have to make some hard
And
decisions.
it was terrible. Even though Father said to me, you are putting it in God's hand, and it's like, wait a minute, I don't wanna do that because.
And I just always think in situations like that, how blessed are we that we know that we will get to see those people again and
Yeah.
put our arms around them and that this is not it. Because can you imagine doing what you had to do and thinking that was it?
Yeah.
You know that it's not it. Like, we are so blessed. Do we want to take a break at all?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Is this
why don't we do it
I'm
right now?
like almost finished, so there's not much left, but is that okay?
Sure.
Like 10 minutes?
Yeah. You're the teacher.
Just take control.
We're talking
You're the talker.
The baby can be born.
Oh, yeah, it's a comfort thing, but it's more of a comfort for us. When I see a loved one not here, I always try to tell people, it's like, if you're in bed getting up on the couch, they don't need it. As
Oh,
You should say yes.
you're not.
Say yes. Hi, Melissa.
I don't.
Oh, you're.
Then I
They're all about you. Join us.
My own thoughts and decisions about my Yeah. Yeah.
I went,
her body.
You don't need this.
That's not gonna flow in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's just,
And we're talking
that's not me.
my son,
And fix things and being around it more. ADHD, bipolar, all of these disorders.
they never questioned without anything wrong.
You know, it's like me talking to some people
I'd say about
yeah,
I don't feel it, but I
It's not granted, you know, God made them wrong, but where the things that we ingest in our body on a daily basis, how is it not looking at that we are doing damage to it?
Works of mercy, it's about
Because Dad recognized it, you know, all these relationships and fighting mother,
But they knew when they came to our house.
Since everybody's here, I think, I'm pretty sure we got this as a parish staff email about compassion. And I thought this is worth passing out, especially with Lent coming up. remember Mike talking about the corporal acts of mercy, visiting the sick, burying the dead, visiting prisoners? Compassion helps people in prison, and that's something we don't really talk about a lot in social justice within St. Al's. So I thought this was an important thing of how you could get involved with prison ministry by your gifts. So I asked him to make copies for us.
Everybody back, should I just
May as well, you've had a long enough break. Did you get a little rest? Okay.
I often said that with my daughters.
Betsy, this is such a hard subject,
I
and
could-
it,
Oh, you're telling me.
it's coming across so much better
So.
than when I and my daughter went through it over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think if I could get her to sit in on this, she would
Well, I
view
do
things a
travel.
little bit differently.
I do travel
But
for coffee.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say
just
that,
good.
I think this is really being well done, Betsy, thank you so
Yes,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Send her the tape.
We are taping it, and Betsy has the slides, so, you know, this is
the
something
slides
that-
alone are not amazing because I don't have everything on there. But I am also willing, like I said, and that's a serious offer, over a cup of coffee.
Oh, this would be.
I mean, again, no pressure there, but it's important enough.
Because she really, she was really turned off when,
Sure.
you know, because, she looked at me and she said, you did this, you put me on the pill, and I'm like, but I thought, I listened to the doctor,
Right.
and we did get to a
We'll get to
different
that.
doctor.
Yeah.
We'll get to
Dr.
that.
Miller was wonderful, and she is
Right.
different than all the other doctors that I've taken them to. But I mean, I didn't know of her, and
But
I
you-
just wanted to help her.
But you can't be responsible for something that you didn't know.
Well, and
That's
then,
not.
you're doing just a
Well,
wonderful
thanks.
job.
Well, we'll see if you say that after this slide.
It's
So we're compatibility.
All right.
It's like such an uncomfortable.
Contraception and sterilization. So, up until 1930, every Christian church opposed artificial birth control, hormonal birth control. At that time, the Anglican Church allowed it. They made an allowance for couples who had a grave reason to avoid pregnancy, like the mother's life was on the line. But over time, it kind of snowballed, partly with the help of Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Who is evil?
Yeah. Here's how I feel about Margaret Sanger. I think that she came from a place, she had some real evil things like eugenics. She was a big fan of eugenics. But I also think she watched her mother literally like die of exhaustion after having like 12 children. And so I think that again, Satan is a creature of extremes, and he takes a very desperate situation, and she went from there, and look at the mess that we have because of that. So with help from her, and also the sexual revolution, when people were searching for sex without consequences, the pill just kind of became what you do.
And we also didn't have teaching about other forms of
Yes.
non-medical birth control or artificial.
So it was either have all the babies, or the rhythm method. There was the rhythm method, but my grandma had 5 babies on the rhythm method, trying to avoid every single time. So we will get to that. And my other grandma had 14. I do not know what method she was using. Yeah.
Obviously.
I am not using that.
Not your gift.
No,
But
no, no.
also with the contraceptives, it allowed you to have that pleasure without supposedly the possibility of getting pregnant. But nobody told you about what's going to happen to you down
Right.
here.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second. Love needs to have responsibility to be real love, right? There needs to be a responsibility with that act, and one of the responsibilities given to Adam and Eve was to be fruitful and multiply. So the church teaches that there are 2 reasons for the marital act. Unitive, so it brings the husband and wife together, makes them one, strengthens their marriage. and procreative, right? So the fact that it's fun is a good thing. It's supposed to be, right? If anyone's telling you that it can't be, then they do not know what they're talking about, right? But it should also have the possibility of being fruitful. Because I'm renewing my wedding vows, and at my wedding I said that I would be open to life, and also to fulfill the total part of my marriage vows, I cannot say to my husband, you get everything except my fertility, that's mine, and you can't have that. I'm not allowed to hold back that part, right? If the love is total. We would say that contraception or sterilization takes away the total and the fruitful part of sacramental love. So the church actually, and this is a hard teaching, this is a really hard one. It is, it's tough. So the church does, I'm going to kind of give you the facts and we'll break it down. Teaches against mechanical or hormonal birth control, any sort of artificial barrier. There are some reasons for that. So hormonal treatments, a lot of times, the IUD and the pill are both abortifacients, and a lot of people are not aware of that. I have friends who've been on the pill for years, and when I told them that, they're like, why did nobody tell me that? So the pill and IUDs work in several different ways, but one of the safeguards against pregnancy is that should the sperm and the egg unite and create an embryo, which we believe is life at that time, the pill or the IUD would not allow the baby to implant in the uterine wall, and everything would be flushed out with the period. So it would be like a forced abortion basically, and the woman would not know that, would not know the difference between that. That's the third.
I was gonna say, like, are they saying that about the pill? Because that's how I have a niece. I have a sister that was on the pill, but
when God wants something, sometimes it happens.
No matter what.
I have friends who've also gotten pregnant on the pill, right?
Plus, I think people don't understand that there's a lot involved.
Absolutely.
Medically.
Yeah.
For antibiotics, if you're on the pill. Guess what? Your pill doesn't work if you're taking it.
Yes, yeah.
If you're taking it properly.
I had a student who got pregnant that way.
Yeah.
She was on an antibiotic and her pill didn't work. And I think that that's the thing that we should be empowering women with that information about their body and about what it is doing exactly, because there are several ways in which the pill works. There are several kind of stop safes
Reasons why.
to stop pregnancy. Same thing with the IUD. So the other thing about that, and again, I think this goes back to your body knows some things before the brain catches up, and the IUD and the pill carry some pretty heavy health complications for women over a lot of time. I have a couple of friends who the doctor has told, you're going to have to find something besides the pill because you're starting to show some precancerous signs, because there are known carcinogens in most pills. The IUD also has some hormones that are not, some of it I just think it gets pushed before we know all of the science behind it. I have friends who have, I would almost say PTSD from getting their IUD removed because of the pain and the intrusion of that. Yeah.
Cautious with if any ladies are on it. I had to switch. I was having morning strokes, TIAs, because of the pill that I was on. Since I was already producing enough estrogen for my body, and some pills provide estrogen.
Yes.
To where some bodies can't handle it. I had 3 morning strokes in 2 years, and you can have a full-blown stroke. So
yes, that's another side effect.
Yeah.
Blood clotting, heart attacks. I have a friend who has like a blood thinning issue, and if she were to go on it, but you don't have to have a blood thinning issue for it to be a bad thing. So I just think that, that's a hard thing. I know with like getting married, Kristen grew up Catholic, and so the one day he was like, so how many kids do we have to have? Like, I just want like the straight information. We were not engaged at that point.
Did you say
And this
15?
was
I did. I was like,
15
well,
would
let's
be an
average.
answer.
asking, or you
I averaged together my grandma and my other grandma, so I'm thinking like 10. No.
I wanted to know if we needed a minivan or a school bus.
But I think like the important angle that I came up with for him was if you love me, you will not require me to go on any sort of medication that will in any way endanger my life. And that was so simple. He didn't take much convincing anyway. He was like, okay, whatever. I had this whole speech. I had a speech prepared for like a month. I was like, he's gonna ask, and this is gonna be a deal breaker. And Chris was like, that's fine, whatever you say. I don't need the whole talk. So now you get it. But I think that it's important, I think that we need to empower men as well to be able to say, go back to that story in the Garden of Eden. What didn't Adam do? He did not protect his woman. And we're not giving men the information that they need to protect their women from something that's is not that good for you. Don't worry, we'll get to the other.
Can I
part.
comment on
Yes.
contraceptive hormones? Hormone therapy, hormone replacement, whatever you want to call it. This is the Catholic Church's stance on reproductive issues. If somebody, like my daughter, has to have something for other medical conditions, I don't know that the Catholic Church says you can't do that.
They don't.
Because it is a medicine for another another purpose, another
Absolutely.
means. It has there's
Thank you.
another ends to the means. So
Thank
this
you.
is strictly of, hey, I just don't want to be behaving myself, so this is what I'm going to do.
But here's the other part to that too. If I've had doctors offer it for anything from acne to bad cramps. And I think a lot of times, and again, this is not really a moral issue, because if you are unmarried and you have acne and that's what you want to use to get rid of it, it's like any medication, it comes with side effects. But a lot of times doctors are treating the symptoms and not the cause. And so there is probably something else that's going on that we are, and you could argue this for anything, any sort of medication, that we are kind of covering up symptoms and not taking care of the cause. I don't know if you've heard of NAPRO doctors. There's not, I don't even know if there are any in the Toledo area, but they're basically gynecologists who start from okay, what's actually going on with you that you're having these really bad cramps? Is it endometriosis? Okay, we're not going to put you on the pill because depending on what pill it is, it could exacerbate the issue. And so I think that a lot of times they just kind of throw that out there, well, do you just want to, if this is a little inconvenient, do you want this? I'm not in any way minimizing. Sometimes there are reasons,
There's
beyond
so
that.
much out there available to where even if you are, for the situation, if you're taking it for another purpose, it could be the lowest dose out there to where conception is still possible. But it's just perceiving to take,
Yeah.
helping in a different situation.
But that's
So
no one
there's
else's
so
business,
much.
too.
Yeah,
That's,
exactly. Right.
yeah.
There's just so much.
But again, I would urge you, because that makes me sad too. My friends are like, well, I didn't feel like I had another choice. What are we doing? And I'm not saying you, but what are we doing as a whole, as men and women, to kind of give people choices that, maybe there's another option out there. I have friends who have taken care of some issues by eliminating certain foods, and oh my gosh, it's like a different life instead of taking medication. That's broad strokes, though. That's not, I understand that that's not everybody, but thank you for bringing that up about there are medical reasons for that. I had a friend say that using contraception or sterilization within the marital act is like saying, I love you, but... and I thought that was a good point, because that's not, whatever you're going to say next just negated the first part of that. So that's a hard thing, but again, it's a place from, the church is looking out for what is best for you, what is the most freeing for you, right? It is about freedom. If God wanted a bunch of little robots, he wouldn't have given us free will, and Adam and Eve would still be hanging out in the garden, right? And that isn't how that worked. This is a tough one for me too. IVF and artificial insemination. There are a lot of things that couples can do to help their fertility along, but two of those things that the church teaches against are IVF and artificial insemination, because conception takes place outside of the marital act, and the conception of a baby is the fruit of the marital act. It only makes sense in that environment. The sexual and procreative acts cannot and should not be separated. Again, one of the issues that's coming up with this is it commodifies children and their birth. So now we have designer babies. It's that slippery slope. A lot of times a doctor will fertilize maybe 8 embryos, and they only take the 2 viable ones, and the other 6 get thrown away. Well, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, you have 8 babies there, and you're only taking the best 2. And so there's kind of a danger to going out on that limb. Some of these, I'm reading articles now that this is leading to, especially artificial insemination, is leading to issues as these kids are growing up. Like if the parent went to a sperm bank, they could be dating a half sibling and not realize it until later. Cloning is another thing. It's replication. It's not creation. That also doesn't take place in the marital act. Here's the flip side to that, though. The children that are created from those situations are still gifts, and should be treated as nothing else other than a gift. Just like we would say a child outside of wedlock. People used to use horrible words. A child is a gift 100% of the time, no exceptions ever. In fact, I was reading somewhere, was it like the 1930s? Who would have been the Pope? Was that Paul VI? Anyway, that was, or maybe the 40s, the first time there was a successful IVF baby. The Pope actually sent a letter of congratulations to the couple who had that baby. Yeah, pretty much saying, not quite the way I would have gone about it, but I'm so happy for you, and we just, really hope that you have a happy life. And that I would say is the only thing you can really say about that, right? That's a very painful subject for a lot of people, and I get that's tough. That's a tough teaching of the church. I have a lot of friends who are saying, because I'm following the teachings of the church, I don't have the gift of children, and that's a really tough thing, right? That requires, again, so much compassion. But that would be, again, the church's teaching. It can't happen outside of the marital act. On the flip side, there are a lot of fertility treatments that the church does allow. It's kind of case by case. I do okay there? Tana-Lynn, anything to add?
No, I think that's great. And I actually had a niece and nephew. The wife was Catholic, the nephew was not, but they married and agreed to have children and to raise them as Catholics. They were having a hard time conceiving, and they actually went to the church to learn how to increase their chances of conceiving without using artificial means. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and NAPRO doctors will do that as well. Those that
Yeah.
kind of get to the bottom root of maybe some gynecological issues can also help with, what is your body like? I had a friend who kept having chemical miscarriages, so she would miscarry very, very early on. And they couldn't figure it out. Here, her third phase of her cycle was too short. So with diet and exercise, she lengthened it. They have a baby now. So a lot of times it's just like, what can we do to work with your body, right? Which isn't that the best solution anyway. But again, total compassion for people who pick that, because that is a painful thing to promise on your wedding day that you will be open to children. And then some of those means of modern science are taken away, but there's a reason for that. I think you can see within that theology of the body.
Well, and we're also seeing situations like freezing embryos,
Yes.
and freezing eggs, and then that leads to lawsuits. That leads to divorces happen, and people are wondering what to do with these
What do we
potential
do?
children. Yeah.
Right. What's
It's
our
pretty
obligation?
frightening, the doors that we've opened.
Kind of a brave new world. Yeah. Okay, so natural family planning is not your grandma's rhythm method. There is an alternative to those hormonal methods. Like I said, with the rhythm method, my grandma had 5 kids trying to avoid all of the time. And the problem with it is that the rhythm method was a counting system, and counting so many days off from your period. The issue with that is that none of us are even sort of the same. And so that doesn't work, because that counting, I remember when I was taking a class, when we were taking that class, Chris, they were showing how if they used the rhythm method, they would have had a baby it hit ovulation every single time. So, but the thing is that natural family planning has gotten a bad rap because of that, of that. So natural family planning is an extremely accurate method of spacing the births of your children. It's really, really well researched. There's a lot of science behind it. It's also 99% accurate when followed properly. That's the part to be like, when followed properly, because someone will be like, well, my parents have, 10 kids. I mean, I'm one of 7. But I think people are surprised when they hear how many of us were planned, because my parents just like babies. Maybe not everybody does necessarily, but that's not a charge that you have to have a lot of kids if you're Catholic. You don't. You really don't, right? That was a personal choice of, and people say your parents must be Catholic. It's like, well, yeah, but it wasn't okay, guess we better start having our half a dozen now. No, not at all. That's not how that works, right? So it is 99% accurate and followed properly, medically safe, organic, gluten-free, all that stuff, right? Low cost, so you might have an initial cost of taking the classes, or you will need to purchase a basal thermometer, which is peanuts. You're very health aware. A lot of women find their own gynecological they can pick up on maybe a change in their bodies, and a lot of women have kind of found their own cancers or whatever before a doctor would have necessarily thought to look, because something changes in their cycle. It's environmentally healthy. It can be immediately reversed, so if 1 month you don't want a baby and the next month you think maybe God is calling you in that direction, you don't have to wait for any hormones to go through your system before you try to get pregnant. Couples on it have only a 5% divorce rate, which is something that they really push, but I think that has to do with a lot of factors, because a lot of those couples are of the same religion. To do NFP, you have to be a good communicator. And so I think that there are a lot of things that go with that. It's not just like NFP will make you not get divorced, not at all. But I think that it has to go with a lot of factors that kind of put that together. It is also not Catholic birth control. People call it Catholic birth control. Again, the ends are different because you are still leaving open the possibility of life during those other times. So you can chart it pretty exactly. It is 99%. But there is still a chance, and some would argue that if we were supposed to have a baby every single time, then God would not give women an infertile period where it couldn't happen, right? So obviously, the charge to be fruitful and multiply doesn't mean have children to the point of exhaustion and complete breakdown. No, absolutely not. So it's a month-by-month decision rather than a no children again ever. That might be the choice in the end, but it's more of a monthly thing. So what you do is you chart the woman's mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical signs. If you want more information about this at all, I can point you in the right direction. You really have to go through a teaching couple. Yeah, but there are a lot of resources out there. You can kind of look up things yourself. We did a video course before we got married, which was okay. But this is another topic that I think takes a lot of compassion that not everybody always has for it, and so that was always my shtick, like when we were getting married. I think I cried like every class we took, which was a good thing it was a video class so that I could have a breakdown every single time. They'd be like, well, you've charted wrong this month, great, thank you. Like, we gotta start all over again. So there's a tiny bit of a learning curve, but it's possible whether you're married already or going to get married or know someone who's going to get married, it's definitely doable. Any questions?
We also have classes in the church available.
Are there?
Yeah.
Where was I? We didn't do that. It's all right.
Too late.
True. There are some people who are pretty conservative who will say, well, we don't want to do that. That is totally fine. There are couples who have as many, find that charge to be fruitful and multiply, to have as many kids as they can. There is nothing wrong with that. But that is also not the path for everyone. So I just want you to be aware. Chris and I always joke about like the couples, like my parents should not teach NFP because it will scare people. Like, there's 7 of us. We were planned, but anybody who goes into that like, oh my gosh, 7 kids, they don't teach it. But if they did, that would be really scary. Like I think the teaching couple that we went through had avoided pregnancy for 6 years and had 3 kids. And so that was kind of promising that like there is a method to it. It's very scientific. Yeah, Gina.
I was listening to EWTN, which by the way is a fantastic source of information. I just think it's great. And they were talking about some devices now.
The ABBA bracelet?
Huh?
Is it a bracelet?
Some kind of electronic device that can tell you if you're ovulating.
Yeah, they have a lot of bracelets that are out now that will like test your hormone levels. And you have like an LH surge the day before you ovulate, and so you can pinpoint almost the day.
To the day, exactly. Mm-hmm. And they're saying,
technology's amazing.
Some of them are most of them are very, very, very accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions on that? Did I cover it okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Janelyn, anything else? Did I cover it? Everything? Okay. Again, that's something, it helps if you talk to somebody who's using it because, like, we got this free subscription, like, with our class to, like, this magazine, and I, like, hated that magazine so much. It would come in the mail, and I would just, like, junk it. Chris is laughing because I would just, like, lose my mind. It was a Catholic magazine, but it was so self-righteous that I was like, trash, like, and I don't, maybe you would have found it differently, but I think you have to find the right person who can tell you, like, yeah, this can be hard, but a lot of things are hard, and you can do it, and we've got this, instead of people are like, well, anybody could do this should be no problem for you. I think you need someone who will really sit down and explain it with you and kind of like get to the depths of it with you, because like it's a hard thing to start at first, but then it's not so bad after that. So just some words of encouragement if you decide to go that direction. These are all my nieces and nephews too, except for one. So that was at our wedding. So responsible, they don't all have one set of parents, by the way. Responsible parenthood is also They're not all from one.
They're all not, okay.
Yeah, these are my 3 older siblings. These are their kids. And there's already an extra that's not in that picture. So the decision to have or not have children at any given time is the choice of a couple and God, right? So you make that choice every month. It used to be that people would say like, unless, so we would say the reasons are finances, health, and mental health. And so I know that there are some couples who are like, unless your health is like you could die having a baby, you should be trying for a baby. No, you have to make that decision about what works for you. Same with finances. Unless you're on the point of financial destitution, you should be, no, you have to decide what does that mean for you as a couple, right? And you have to pray about what God is asking from you, which couples do that anyway, right? So it's just another facet to decide what that might be. So we know that children are a gift from God. And that they teach us virtue, patience, and self-sacrifice. I'm not a parent yet, but I'm a teacher, and I can say that all of those things, especially the patience part, on a daily basis, they will teach you. And I think that anyone who's been around a little child for any amount of time knows that little children make you want to be the best version of yourself. Chris and I were babysitting our 4-month-old godson this weekend, and I don't know what, did you like try almost cuss or something? You're like, oh no. He can't even hear, he doesn't even understand that yet. But the children do make you the best version of what you can be. And I think it goes back to that whole we as the body of Christ should be supporting people who are having children in whatever state that might be, married or unmarried. If we say that children are a gift and that life is a gift, then we should not be icing out people who are listening to that call, right, and having those children.
I have 3 grandchildren that were born out of wedlock. I wouldn't trade them for anything in the world now.
But
Their timing could have been better, yes, but I will not trade them.
No. And again, that's the church says that the best measurement that you have for morality is a well-formed conscience. So that would be a conscience that has all of the information and makes a decision based on that. And that's what responsible parenthood. The church would in fact discourage having children to the point of financial bankruptcy or to the point of the threat of the life of the mother. That's not it at all. So I guess my final, if you take nothing else from this, it would be that we are all made in the image of God. We are His unique masterpiece, and that comes with a weighty responsibility to love the way that God loves, which is really, really hard and is a struggle every day. But what about Christianity is not a struggle? If we were looking for something easy, you wouldn't already be here. So, do you have any questions? Thank you for saving your tomatoes for the end.
The biggest misconception about the Catholic Church that people that are not Catholic have is a gay person or somebody that is trans or somebody that's had a child out of wedlock or somebody that's had an abortion can go to confession with a priest. And when they get done confessing whatever they are on that spectrum, the priest doesn't say, get out of my parish and don't come back. Mm-hmm. They give them forgiveness.
They give them the same as they would give me or
Absolutely.
anybody else.
Absolutely.
So the church
So
is...
that kind of went along with the question that I wrote down.
Oh yeah, the questions. Many things.
So I'm glad you said it the way you did, I guess, because so for me, pregnancy takes a lot out on me. So I have an IUD. So does that mean every month when I go to confession, I need to confess this? Oh, I still have it.
No.
I'm
What
sorry.
would you say, Janelyn?
No.
I would say that is a good question for Father Mark.
Yeah.
My guess is that Father Mark is going to say that's, the church is teaching.
Yeah.
You need to make an informed spiritual decision
Mhm.
about that.
I would bring it up, but I don't
Yeah.
think that confession has to be like, here's my list of things I'm doing wrong. And I think it's more like, I've had things in my life that are just like completely reoccurring, like that are not gonna change like tomorrow. Like I just know that I'm gonna leave and it's gonna keep, but I think that that's understood, that it's not like, here's your list, and it's different from when you were like 7, your list of things that you're taking. So I think, and I've even gone into confession and said, here's what's going on, and I'm just having trouble being sorry. I'm not really sorry. But I think that's part of the grace of the sacrament, is like to, that will give you the grace to kind of like explore that decision. Like, is that something you still want to do? Is it not? But I think bringing it up is better than not, if that makes sense. Not to be like, oh yeah, you have to say it every time. You better bring it up every time. But like, yeah, like make it part of that process. And I would talk. I mean, I I would. I don't know.
It's not
Yeah,
uncommon
was it-
for lifelong Catholics to not follow the
A lot of
rules
people
when it
don't
comes
know
to
this.
procreation.
A lot of people don't know all of this.
Yeah, we have, you look around the congregation, we have a lot of people with no children and 2 children,
Yeah.
you know.
But on the flip
So-
side, might want
Yeah.
children.
And they might be
Right.
doing it naturally. They might be doing it other ways.
That's
It's not
not
necessarily.
business. That's
Yeah,
not our
it's nobody's
business.
business. That's between
Father
you.
Mark always says, it's
and
my
God.
job
Yeah.
to
Between you
teach
and
you the
God.
church's
Right.
teaching,
It's
it's not my job to control your bedroom.
Right.
Right.
Yes, between you and God.
My girlfriend, her mom and dad were Catholic, and that's how she was brought up. And they only had 4, and my girlfriend would
Only
always say, there is no way that God looked at my mother and said, oh, you were a good Catholic woman, Judy, so you're not gonna have any more children. You've had 3 and you've had your boy, so that's 4, you're perfectly fine, so you don't have to worry about it. Cause she's like, there had to have been something that my mom didn't have anymore after my brother, you know?
My
So,
sister-in-law
yeah.
has an IUD, and I keep waiting for Chris knows this because I'm talking about all the time, waiting for her to kind of ask me. So they can be like, look, here's another option, no pressure. but again, I wouldn't expect her to be like, oh, okay, like I guess I'll go to the OBGYN tomorrow. It's a process. It's all a process. So does that kind of answer that, Heidi? I mean, yeah, it's just part of the journey. Like you keep asking, like, is this the right thing for this month? Okay, do I need to reevaluate? And of course, your husband, like that's a very personal decision between a couple. And I do not.
And it does need to be between the
The
couple.
couple.
So
And God,
if,
yeah.
you know, if you go back to the teachings about that, I think St. Paul gives that the unbelieving partner in a marriage will be saved by the faith of the believing partner, which is kind of a mystery.
Yeah, I think
But when you go back to that principle, you have to realize that God is dealing with both of you. And you might not always get to the same point at the same time, and we're called to
Right.
give up for that other person. So maybe somebody has stronger faith and says, well, we can do this without any problem, and the other person says, no, we can't.
Right.
We're supposed to honor the weaker member.
I have a friend who, they were on the pill, and she was like, I just want to try natural family planning, and he was like, no, we have a 5-year plan. Kids are at the end of the 5-year plan. He was just like so scared, and so she didn't like push it. Like I was kind of encouraging her, like, yeah, I mean, here's the information if you want to know any more, and it took some talking, but it was more like conversations. It wasn't like her being like, please, 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 please. It was more like, well, here's some more of the research. If you see, how this would be better for me. And how it's still very effective if we follow, like, look how, I think it's really empowering because it is super cool to be able to see, like, what your body does. And I feel like, I can't speak for Chris, but I feel like there's an appreciation for, like, especially the female body of, like, oh my gosh, it just does all that stuff every month. And, like, I didn't tell it to do that. But again, those are, like, conversations, it's just not gonna, be a one-time thing where you're like, I think we should do this. Okay, it's more like it's conversations. It's deciding as you go. What's up, Aubrey?
I have kind of a question I guess it kind of goes together as far as, obviously my son's out of Willock. I was fresh out of high school.
You were young.
And
yeah.
so, like, I just have a question as far as the whole living together before you're married. I was with my son Zach for 5 years, and when we weren't living together, it was the honeymoon stage. The minute we became a unit, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work for me or us or this child to why we didn't end up married. Before Al, there was another relationship that was for 6 years. We lived together.
Right.
And when there was a situation that came up with my son, he flat out said he may not live with us anymore.
Oh.
So it's like, sometimes it's hard for me because, Al and I do live together. To where it's like sometimes you can love someone over the moon and back.
Absolutely.
And care for that person. But as a unit, it just doesn't work somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say sometimes it takes that long to figure it out, but
Oh yeah.
for me, it
Took me
did.
18 and a half years of marriage to figure out. it didn't
So,
And I mean, do you
I
want
guess that's not
do
why
you want a tally of how many times I wanted to kick Chris out in the last year and a half? I mean,
So I guess I'm getting at like
yeah, no, absolutely,
Al and Father Mark
Aubrey.
had their meeting on Monday because he was married and now he's finally going through the steps to get
Yeah.
to that. to where,
That's great.
you know, we are gonna talk about our future, we
Yay.
have.
Okay.
But we do live together.
Right.
You know, so is this a conversation I need to have with the church on a personal level? Like, I understand
Yeah.
what we're teaching. But
Right,
this is-
right.
Because he has 4 kids from a marriage. One child is gonna be 22 at the end of March.
Yeah.
I have a 17, soon to be 18-year-old.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
A lot of
uncommon
combined.
unity. To
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
obviously we are making sure this is the proper choice for us as a unit, with God and these children.
Yeah.
So why we're
I
doing
think it's always
there.
better to
Yeah.
err on the side of openness with your priest.
Yes. I would talk to Father Mark about it. My thoughts on that, it's tough because you have a child and you were very young too, and that makes like that decision making process like pretty tough, right? Like
it has, because it's now it's hard to date
yeah.
as a single woman with a child, to where I didn't date 1 week we're going on a date, 2 months later I'm dating someone else, or 3 months later. For me it was
You had to decide if you were gonna make a commitment to that
relationship to
person.
see if this is going to develop into something, and I was very cautious about who my child was around,
Right.
to where those
And that's so wise.
in-body units in that house were the only ones around my child for that specific reason.
I will say that before Patrick and I got married, we lived together briefly, because we tried dating, and we had 5 kids between the ages of 11 and 14 and a
So you
half
feel
at
my
the
pain.
time. And, you know, within 6 weeks of dating, we pretty much decided we were gonna marry, because we said if we keep dating, somebody's house is gonna get burnt down. This doesn't work well. They're too good babysitters.
That's hilarious.
And I regret now that I moved in with him even a little bit before we got married, because of the precedent that I think it set for the kids.
Oh.
Some of the kids had already seen unfaithfulness in a marriage, and they already had the expectations that maybe this little relationship will work, maybe it won't. The only way to find out is to live together and find it. Well, that's not the only way to find out. So, no judgment or condemnation.
Oh, yeah.
This is coming from me who did it. I wish that I had not done that and perpetuated the myth.
And everybody has a different story. My wife and I, we met the old-fashioned way at the bar. As was in a talk.
Was it
No, but
Howard's?
I mean, no, not Howard's. But we lived together for 2 years before we got married. We've been married for 18 years.
Right.
And I don't have any regrets, I guess. I mean, other than I should probably, that should have probably been one of my confessions,
So whatever
but.
works for you as a unit, everyone is different, every situation
I
is
would
different.
I would talk to Father
I'm still
Mark
gonna-
for sure.
oh,
I mean,
yes.
I have to kind of
I'm
a
stand
firm
firm
believer.
I
here.
want to say he's not blind to the situation of why I haven't said anything
Yeah.
to him just yet, but I mean, I just wanted to make sure the time was producing, because I don't want to say I forced Alan to go into the church, but he actually said, you know, guess
He's
what?
interested in it.
I'm
I
a,
made the appointment, because I think last week I was talking about, I wish you would have been with us at RCA, because there's so many misconceptions over that whole process, and
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that what the church is teaching is right. It is
Yeah.
moral. It is the right thing to do. It's the right way to teach.
It's for
I
your
believe that
protection.
God also speaks to us in different languages. I'm an obstinate child. He beats me a lot because he should be full in his discipline.
And I think a lot on the same line. I think he had to get me to a point where there was no way but, you know,
A lot of us only learn through pain. So,
you know.
Pretty much.
we need to get ready for mass, and we need to clean up the room, so thank you.
We survived.
And if you guys would like to read, watch this, I will find out from Mike how to